Morning, Deirdre.
Good morning, Tom. How are you today?
I'm good. Where am I?
Well, you're on the New England coast, clearly, and that looks like Massachusetts, some of the Massachusetts shore fishing territory. And I bet
So
fog
I
is,
did tell you that this was taken earlier today. It was taken this morning, but I'm not sure exactly where, but you have a theory, right?
well, I have a theory that it's right on the ocean because today and tomorrow are going to be the only days this month that we get above freezing here. So that's, you can see snow on the ground there. So this fog is coming from the snow melting or the snow interacting. And by the way, on Sunday we're getting another 6 to 8 inches. So
There you go.
yes.
Yeah, I hate to tell you, Deirdre, it is now 58 degrees here.
And darn, we're going to be at a negative wind chill in 2 days.
Yeah. And that's actually low. We should be in the 60s right now. I think we were close to 70 yesterday here in the high desert. High desert. What are we talking about today and why?
Well, since this is the first video of this year, we've taken a few weeks off for vacation here. I thought it would be good. We thought it would
Deirdre,
be
we don't. How many days did you actually not work over the holidays?
maybe,
Three that I knew of.
yeah, yes,
I'm just
right.
serious. Three that I knew of.
Yes, then that's about it. We have too much fun working.
We do.
But anyway, it may be good to remind people what we're doing here. With our deep business initiative, we call it deep business because we do go deep into business. We provide insights to people. We analyze, think through, discuss, and come up with things that are not so obvious, things that we don't see discussed in the press, but to us are critically important for people trying to do business well. Um, we also work to be relevant. What I mean by that is you and I have talked at some length, actually, over the course of the past months about how we see that the business press and business education are not necessarily keeping up with what's actually happening in the work world, actually keeping up with the decisions that leaders have to make when they're developing strategies, making decisions, and so forth. So that's what we do. We try to provide insights about things that are absolutely relevant to you, our listeners, as you go about your daily work. Now, over the course of the next few weeks, you and I are going to focus on something because we see the world at an inflection point here. Not that we could just define the two sides of this, but look in the United States. We have a change in administration, a change which is going to bring in different policies, quite different policies. We see a lot of change in administrations around the world. We see demographic changes, all of these social issues we've talked about before. And we think that the beginning of this year is going to be a point where a lot of things start to be seriously addressed and looked at. And that's really what we're going to be talking about in the next few videos. Um, Now, remind everyone that we're not political and we're going to keep this out of the political realm. We're going to talk to you about business and about things that we are seeing and thinking about and discussing. But we see change. We see change that affects how you do your jobs in three areas. One, in government, clearly, at both the state and federal levels. Two, in the whole business ecosystem, how businesses are going about their work. And this comes from multiple aspects, the new technologies, the emerging technologies, changes in the workforce, changes in the social situation, interactions with the change in government, and so forth. And then we also see that leaders and managers need to think act differently and do different things to become successes. You can't do the same old thing anymore. You've lost the period where you could do this. Now you're going to have to start to think and act differently to be successful in the world. And these are things that we're going to talk about. And I'm going to tie what I've just been talking about to two concepts you and I talk about a lot, Tom. One is the game. We talk about leaders operating on a chessboard with all of the different pieces, and each of the pieces makes moves. And leaders need to not only react to the moves, but they have to anticipate the moves if they're going to be successful. So clearly, given what I've been saying, the game is changing for everyone, absolutely everyone. So we intend to help leaders start to figure out how they can anticipate the moves in their game. I'm also going to tie this back to our radar screen that you and I keep talking about. And we're not going to pull it up. You've all seen this. But remember that this starts with the mindset of a leader. And part of what we're going to do is talk through how you may have to start to adapt your mindset to what's going on these days so you can move ahead. And then that ties in with the characteristics of the leader, how leaders do their job, how leaders develop their strategies, how they carry out their work in terms of our leadership and management model. And then, as you and I keep saying, it all comes down to the value exchange. How do you provide value in the marketplace? And more important, how do you get value back from the marketplace, given all of the changes going on? So, given all of that, Tom, and all of this setup, why don't you start it?
Yes, you're going to dump it in my lap. Yes.
Right.
Thank you, dear. Yes. So the topic of the next few weeks as we do this, and we'll be delivering these videos and all of our material on weekends. Weekends are going to be our delivery. Um, so we only have one period of time. We're not going to flood you with emails or flood you with content. There's plenty of things you need to do during the week. But what we see is, as you said, these changes, not just in when you talk about it, Deirdre, I know you think globally like I do. This is about global government changes. We're seeing it happen in to our eyes. Some governments have already begun that change. Some will do it soon.
Right.
And some, it's not clear what they're going to do, even though it looks like they will have to do something. That's one, as you said. And then, as you also were commenting about the institutions, we are seeing, and you can see it in the United States, we can see it in other major countries that look somewhat like the US. And in that, I include, China and Russia, Iran, very large countries that may not be as aligned with us as we perhaps, well, we'll just leave it at that. They may not be aligned in the same way we are. They're going through massive change like this also.
Yes.
It's not paralleling, but they're going through massive changes. None of those places are stable right now in the way that we have thought in the past. So that's also an aspect of what we're talking about. We have to think about it. This is no longer a case. And I saw this morning, and you and I spend an enormous amount of time every single day tracking what's going on around the world, both economically, politically, and socially, so that we can see what does that mean for a person trying to build and lead a business that inevitably is global. It's just inevitably global. Um, and one of the things we're seeing I think we are seeing, Deirdre, three key elements that are changing from my point of view. I know you have your own set that you see, but when I look at this world, I see the first is we're shifting from what the default answer has been in a lot of cases. The default answer, especially in this culture, in our culture, in the US, has been one of restrict. The default answer has been restrict. Okay, we're going to fact check. We're going to censor. We're going to whatever. I think we're entering a period now where the default's going to be open. So the default's going to be, nope, we're going to just put it out, let everybody deal with it. Um, that's the first big change. I think the exception in the past was open. Okay, well, we're going to restrict this, but we're going to take some key things and just open them up. Immigration, for example, in the US or in some key Western countries. I think it's going to be the other way around, Deirdre. I think we're entering a phase where the default's going to be open, and then restrict is going to be entered at things like immigration policies, things like global economic policy. And I think we're going to see, and clearly from the US, but I think this is going to be broadly used, or tariffs and other economic restrictions among friendly countries to maneuver the game differently. That's the first big shift I see. Again, not you and I aren't thinking about it from a political point of view, whether it's good or bad. We're just saying we see this happening, so we have to think about what does it mean to us. The second thing I think we're going to see is that people are going to want results now, not invest now for results later. They're going to want results now. And I think what we're seeing is that there are a lot of reasons for this. And you and I think that one of the key aspects of why is because of the third element, which is time is not our friend anymore, right? So we're going down from too open, from restrict, down to results now, and then time is not our friend. Now, why do we say time is not our friend? It's because technology and the use of technology has made the cycle of life increase by the productivity and the spread of information and the ability to do things and the leverage it gives people to do things. As I constantly say, all of our computers and phones and many of the devices, they're sitting there waiting for us to tell it what to do because it's functioning at a much higher level and increasingly so. And our job, if you're to stay relevant at the individual level, is to learn how to develop that partnership with the machine, right? That human machine partnership. We have an initiative in getting people to test out and use AI, right? At the lowest level of use, but just so that people develop, and people that have taken and seen our videos on this stuff, they come back and say, that was really helpful. They're developing that ability to see the human machine partnership in a slightly different way instead of being afraid of it, which is part of what you and I are doing on the side. But we see those three things, and I'm sorry I've taken so long here, Deirdre. I don't mean to be too long-winded at this, but the first is the major trends that I see that we as leaders, we have to think about whether, by the way, you don't have to take mine or yours, right? This is just what we see. What we're trying to do is to get you to think about the subject and come up with your own that fit your context, right? Yours and mine happen to be global. It happens to be leading, building businesses. It happens to be other things that both you and I are involved in. You're involved in a lot of the environmental aspects. I'm involved in a lot of the government institutional things. But it's more lifting beyond that so that we see what these trends are. And so that the first is too open from restrict. The second is results now. And third is time is not our friend. And those, I think these are going to be edgy in our lives coming up soon. So with that, I'm going to throw the ball to you. And thank you for being patient that I did a 5-minute rant on this subject. But, it's funny because you and I have spent a lot of time over the last, I don't know, 3 weeks or 2 weeks on this well, always, but we've been on this very pointedly on this subject.
Right. And one of the aspects, I'm going to preface my comments by saying one of the aspects of what we discuss is that you tend to operate at a more theoretical level than I do. And I tend to like to start to translate your themes and your observations and so forth into what leaders can do or what's going to happen on the ground. So my initial 3 things, and then I'm going to throw it back to you. Don't think you've stopped talking today
You
here.
grab my coffee quick here, dude.
Right. Um, are sort of like aspects of what you've been talking about. The first is I think we're going to see major changes in the technology industry. That the technology industry has had to deal with significant regulation, not just in the US, but also in the EU, for heaven's sakes, where they're being watched very, very carefully, and all over the world, actually. And that the technology industry may become more prominent as an industry, if that's possible,
Yeah.
but it's also a little freer because it's not going to have so much regulation. And where this might get really interesting is in the whole field of AI, where you have one population who are not that familiar with the technology, who don't even know what to think about it or say about it. And then you have the technology population with what you and I talk about their aspirational goals in relation to AI and so forth. And you and I see, in fact, we were just talking about it 20 minutes ago, that all of our devices are now having AI pushed into it, which is affecting the very settings on our computers or the very way we use the programs we've been using forever. So it's going to be interesting to see how we as a country react to or interact with the growing AI development. All sorts of entities are developing for all different sorts of AI. And we've talked about this separately, and I won't go into it now. But I just see this as a major change here coming from your openness as opposed to restriction.
Mhm.
Another thing I see is the reduction of the amount of regulation in the business world, in the business ecosystem. Mergers have been restricted over the past several years. I think over the coming years, there are going to be more mergers. There's going to be more interaction between businesses. This may mean some consolidation in some industries. It may mean some very interesting combinations of capabilities. I think also we're going to see less SEC oversight of some of the actions that business takes for good or for ill. We don't know how this is all going to work out. But I think those are two areas where the business ecosystem has had to be very alert, I'll put it that way. And I think the trends are going to be more pro-business going forward. Now I'm going to talk about one more thing before throwing it back to you. And this is me actually maybe getting slightly theoretical here, although at a very practical level. And that's the whole idea of decentralization in government. It is my observation, and remember, this is from my history major orientation as opposed to any daily politics here. It is my observation that the Democratic administrations tend to focus on federalizing everything, bringing everything into the federal government, while Republican administrations tend to work to decentralize, throwing things back out to the states. It is my sense, and I believe we're already starting to see that in some of the conversations that are going on right now, even in this month before the inauguration, that there's going to be more emphasis on states for doing things and a little less emphasis on the federal government stepping in and doing things. Along the same lines, there's going to be, I think, more of an emphasis on getting the administration right, which is actually easier to do the closer you are to the work at hand. That is, maybe it's easier to get it right at the state level than the federal level. I'm talking in very big generalities here. Um, and this connects back to what you said earlier about the sense on the part of many people that some of our major federal institutions or educational institutions are not operating as well as they should be operating. So people may be losing a tolerance for allowing things to straighten themselves out and are just going to pick up and run with things themselves. And this ties back to your openness. to your sense of wanting results now, to sense of wanting to move ahead and get things done. And obviously, if time's not our friend, we've got to work with the time we have right away, very quickly here. So those are my initial thoughts on this. I've got a lot more to say, but at this point, I'm going to give you a chance to jump in here and say something else.
So I'm obviously, as I usually do, taking notes as I listen to what you say. You know, I think, Deirdre, that um, the elements you just laid out, I counted five key elements: the tech industry itself, the ecosystem regulation, decentralization, states versus the their influence, and then tolerance. I think, did I get them?
That covers the ground,
Okay,
yes.
good, good. Good. Makes me feel like at least I was listening instead of just
Yes.
had my head down here doing tic-tac-toe. So what hit me when I'm listening to what you say, and it's what you and I keep saying, I think there's a real danger right now for anyone, meaning an employee or a leader or an influencer in society, to appear stale or to
Very
be
much so.
stale. Um,
Very much so.
and it's worse to be stale than it is to appear stale.
Right.
But I think we are going to witness a period where we're going to see a number of people, and by the way, that because institutions are people, we're going to
Yes.
see institutions that appear stale and are stale. And I think you and I discussed one institution a couple of days ago where we said somebody was making a really great argument. That argument was really valid about 2 years ago. But
Yes.
but today it's not about that at all. It's about relevance rather than about price value, right? It's about relevance of the value. And that relevance, Deirdre, that's stale. Or another way to think about it is when you're listening to people or you're listening to their marketing or you're observing what they do, it appears they're looking backwards.
Yes.
They look like they are looking backwards to me. And my
Or they're stuck in,
reaction to at least what I've seen a lot of happening recently, and I mean recently, like even earlier today, is I see a bunch of people and they look like they're turned the wrong way.
I see people stuck in their job descriptions. And I'm going to throw something out here that you may disagree with, but I think that many businesses who are calling their workers back into the office from working at home are perceiving the same problem. That when people are out of the office doing work in their homes, they're not connected with where the business is moving. They're working on what they have been working on. They may be very productive. They may be doing good work, but they're not in the flow of where organizations need to move. No organization is static. Organizations need to move, particularly in times of change. Think about what we're outlining here, Tom. Like massive changes in the game, in the radar screen, and how leaders are going to have to react. How can you then get your business to be not stale, to be moving forward, if a lot of your workforce is at home and not connected directly with you? And I haven't seen this articulated as a reason to get people back in the office. People talk about, wanting to do better teamwork or get people connected with their leaders and so forth. I think those are just symptoms of what we're talking about here. If you need your teams to work better, that means that some people weren't working at the level of, or on the topics of, or in the same mindset as the people who have been in the office. If people need to be connected to the leaders, that probably means that there's teaching that needs to happen. that people need to be to learn more about the goals, about the directions, about new work, get more training, and so forth. So that's the sort of thing that I think is going to be, businesses have already started working on it, the good businesses have, on trying to get people not stale, trying to get people back into the real swing of business. Now, I jumped in and interrupted you, so back to
Oh,
you.
no, I'm glad you did because I think you're exactly right. I'm not sure I'm not making a judgment about the workforce situation other than to say that it is contextual.
Yes,
I mean, if it is contextual, and what you're talking about is businesses that have been built that are built around everyone being in the office. If you built your business to be, and you've made this point in other
yes,
things we've done, if you've constructed your whole business from the beginning, which some tech companies do, and many companies that are consulting do, and you've constructed and you have all the systems to be able to keep people together and so forth, that's different. If you created that whole thing without this kind of thinking built in, it creates
right.
a problem for you, especially in places like right now. And this is so your point about with these kind of massive changes occurring, getting your organization aligned after you have figured out what you think you need to do, then getting your organization aligned is really tough. And it's going to take really groundbreaking thinking. But one of the things I think we have to constantly remind ourselves is that we're going to see a group of people that are not going to react well to this kind of change and will continue to look stale and continue to be stale when you dig into it. And they're going to be not, as you said, they won't fit your fifth one. They won't fit the tolerance.
Mhm.
People don't are going to have less and less tolerance for people that don't fit.
And I think that's very true in relation to the new technologies, the emerging technologies, not just the generative AI, but the use of all of these other technologies that we've been talking about for years now, Tom. Automation, robotics, data analytics, machine learning, and so forth. If you're not staying up with what your company is doing or your situation is doing in relation to these things, you lose a step in relation to your job. You can't do your job. And you're going to be very stale, and then businesses are going to have to make some decisions here. This is another aspect of the tolerance that I think the marketplaces are going to be looking to business. I didn't mean marketplaces, I mean the financial markets are going to be looking at businesses to see how unstale they are.
Yeah.
Are they keeping up with all of this? Are they moving ahead? Are they making the right decisions? There are going to be tremendous pressures on leaders, not only to be thinking in terms of some of the things we're talking about, but also to make sure that their managers down through the organization can execute at the level needed to make sure that the companies as a whole are doing this thing. This puts a whole lot of pressure on the whole strategic and business planning process, as well, of course, as the review process of all employees. But I think that the financial markets may really be ahead of a lot of businesses here in expecting things from business these days. So leaders have to be aware of this, particularly in relation to what's going to change in globalization. You mentioned tariffs earlier. We've been on the globalization trends. Are we shifting to tariffs? What does that mean? Another of my point is that there may be a lot of movement of businesses from outside the US back into the US.
Mhm.
I
Oh,
remember
definitely.
when NAFTA went into effect. I actually at the time was doing some work on the whole NAFTA project. And at that point, after NAFTA was signed, a lot of business left the US. I think a lot of that's going to be coming back, but it's going to be coming back not as it was in the 1990s when NAFTA came into effect. It's going to be coming back as business in 2025. So there's going to have to be a lot of updating of business and capabilities and processes and systems around the return of business to places where businesses may not have been predominantly for a long time. So this is going to require a lot of leadership, a lot of awareness, a lot of presence on the part of leaders, a lot of making sure you understand what your business truly needs to be successful today. Not what it needed to be successful traditionally, but what it needs today. And massive, and this ties in with what I was just saying. There's going to need to be massive training of the workforces, which means that people are going to have to be on premise for that, and so forth.
Yeah, I think, you know, the what one of the trends I believe we're going to be facing first is the issue of fit is going to become even more critical.
Correct.
And it's because there's going to be this issue of, does a person fit what
Correct.
they need to do to be effective at the job? And also the lack of tolerance. Now,
Correct.
I think with where you and I, and we're somewhat peripherally observing this, is the plans to inspect and retool the agencies of the US government. That's going to occur not just here, that's going to occur around the world. I believe in the developed economies as they begin this shift, which is, I think, a natural shift back and forth we've seen before. But this is going to be where there's going to be a massive dislocation of people in this country, Deirdre. And part of the design, at least that I've seen so far, is the design. And this, you were telling me this earlier. I don't believe you mentioned it. Oh, you did. You talked about decentralizing. Um, is this move in government to decentralize government
Yes.
from the national level down to the state level, and then as a result, people will either have to move to where that decentralization occurs or have to find something else to do. And so you're not only going to have these institutions shrink in size, in physical size, meaning of the number of employees, but also you can have this dislocation of people against the opportunity at the moment, right?
Right.
So when you and I look at institutions that provide this kind of work, there's a huge opportunity for people to be able to build programs to help these people become more fit, relevant, become more relevant, provide value going forward, not the value that they have been presenting at
Correct.
various levels. Huge opportunity. I see, and over the past 24 hours, I got information from two of the places I went to school. And both of those places, with very nice names, by the way, and big endowments, both of them, one of them was focused on, you got the same one because you and I went to one place together, right?
Yes.
It was focused on a seminar on how to deal with a personality who is moving into government and how to deal with that,
Yeah.
right? From as a business leader. Now, the second one was from, again, a great university, and it said, join our seminars in the early part of this year on how to create a strategy. Well, we're going, creating a strategy is not what leaders need right now. They need to figure out what the landscape is, right?
Correct.
Putting the strategy together is stuff that we can do on the side, and we can help people do strategy. That's fine. There's an aspect of what we do that provides you that background if you need it, right?
Right.
But I think that we're missing this point about the point you and I are on this very moment, is that what leaders need to be thinking about right now is what is changing here, not individuals and not partisan politics and but what is the context and what opportunities does that provide? And then also what risk does it provide, right?
Yeah.
Because we've seen this concept of unseen enemies.
Yes.
You and I talk about this. We've talked about this for years. We put it in our books, and people constantly, they kind of, I mean, I had one CEO who didn't want to hear it from me. They wanted me to talk to the staff and let the staff tell him. Um, by the way, he's not doing so well these days, but it doesn't shock me. Um,
Right.
because my point was there are things we are seeing an unseen enemy destroying incredible numbers of lives of human beings in Los Angeles.
Yes.
And
Terrible.
it's devastating. And
Yes.
it's the proper use of that is the word deplorable, right?
Yes.
It is truly deplorable. And shame on all of us for letting that get out of control like that. Regardless, we have a bunch of situations like that that could potentially happen that may have been able to predict. A lot of people were predicting something like that could happen, and conditions that if you had really studied it hard, you could see that it had a high level of potential. Um, but that wasn't the set of priorities at the time of the leaders. And I think that's a very, very serious and difficult situation. And it needs to be dealt with humanly, right? Humanely, um,
Yes.
and quickly. Be that as it may, that's an unseen enemy.
Correct.
We have an unseen enemy in technology. You pointed one out. It's AI. Is it? We love it. We use it every single day, all the time.
Yes, we do.
And there's a question. Does it deserve the restrict exception as opposed to the open exception? There are arguments on both sides of that, by the way.
Yes.
As you know, and I've been on both sides, and at the moment I'm on the open, but it could very well be I'll move to restrict as I get more and more thinking about where it's going. Um, but there's an example right there. The other in technology is in cybersecurity, things that people roll their eyes on. If you and I did something on cybersecurity, people would go, right? And yet, you and I have strengthened all of our cyber stuff, and I just did. And we spent, what, 15 minutes on waiting to do this as I was clearing up, making sure that my, industrial level VPN was not going to cut us off here as we're doing this. Um, why? Because we know that we have kind of let ourselves get a little bit too far with letting that be a little bit too open in our society, at least in our country. And I'm not talking about the information, I'm talking about the actual infrastructure itself.
Correct.
Um, and so there's another unseen enemy that could be hidden in the infrastructure based on cyber, because conflicts are going to quickly heighten and start in that realm. That's where it's going to start. So I'm going to stop there and let you take over because I've spent too much time focusing on stuff that I've been talking about. But when I listen to what you're saying, Deirdre, that's how I'm developing it based on the thinking about how do we make sure we're seeing this properly.
And what you've actually been talking about are new factors, factors that 5 years ago we didn't hear leaders really talking about. Yeah, maybe cybersecurity, but 5 years ago we didn't have the state-sponsored hackers hacking into the Treasury Department or so forth. And so I think that leaders have to be very much aware of all of the problems that can arise. The desperate situation in Los Angeles, and though I've hiked those hills, I'm heartbroken.
And
Oh,
you actually went to school. Well, you went to school in California, went to Stanford, but
in
you
the
know
north,
that area.
but spent time in the South around there. It's heartbreaking, but think of all of the business ramifications
Yeah.
now that are going to have to be dealt with afterwards, ramifications that are going to spread out and affect, frankly, most industries because of some of the things that are going to have to happen afterwards. But this is only one instance of the possible things that could happen. We actually, and I bet most people aren't aware of this, I read this because I read deep science stuff. We actually came pretty darn close to having a sunstorm take out part of our electrical system not that long ago. And you're like, our business is prepared for those sorts of things. But these are actually um, these sorts of unseen enemies or these sorts of risks are things that can exist outside of some of the changes we're talking about.
Yes.
They're very important, but they would go on regardless of which administration was in place or some of the other changes that we were talking about. Um, I think that the inflection point is more about the moves on the chessboard, the game. Like, what is going to happen on your game in terms of regulation, in terms of marketplace, in terms of changes in uh, customer demands, in changes of the marketplaces you can operate in. If tariffs come in and there are retaliatory breaches in
Right.
other marketplaces, how would that affect you? These are things that need to be anticipated. You can't just wait until it happens because the impact could be too great for you to even recover. This is why we constantly talk about, and it forms the frame of our radar screen, the mindset of a leader. Someone always monitoring the ecosystem, monitoring the marketplace, seeing what's out there and thinking about that's happening, could this affect me? That's happening, could this affect me? And this may be the time when you use the word tolerance. I've used the word tolerance too. This may be when the marketplace loses tolerance in the other direction that we're talking about for the leaders who are not paying attention to these things. There are an awful lot of ways that people can meet needs in their marketplaces now. And people just may need a push to find themselves out of a marketplace and a former competitor in, or a new type of business in, or a new type of technology taking over something. This gets down to something, and my guess is we're running out of time here, so we don't have time to get into this. We're getting down to the whole question of value exchange.
Yeah.
How can leaders maintain their value exchanges given all of the changes going on? And maybe this is a point to stop, Tom, that this is the subject of our next video that we're recording on all of this change. Does that make sense to you?
It makes perfect sense, Deirdre. Look, I appreciate, what you've brought where you focused us on the tech industry and the effects on the tech industry, the effects on the ecosystem of and what we can expect in terms of regulation, or the thinking about that aspect, the thinking about centralization, decentralization, the thinking about states versus federal, the thinking about tolerance. I translated that into then fit. Also, we didn't get into the point that we really should get into is I believe that beyond employee fit, we're going to have leader fit issues.
Oh, very definitely, very definitely. I think we're going to see a lot of turnover in leadership and board positions, board positions. Let's not forget those,
Yeah,
where board members who have let themselves get stale may find
absolutely.
that the stockholders vote them out.
Absolutely. And that issue of being stale is a big deal. It is a
Correct.
big deal. And we see it unfortunately manifesting itself in marketing. And that is dangerous, really, really dangerous. And as we all know, because you don't want to be going the wrong direction and have the market not react the way you would expect it to.
Right.
Then on top of that, I believe we're going to see the point about we're moving to open from restrict in many countries, and I think that's going to even occur in many countries. We're also going to see that people are going to more demand results now, not in the future. They want to see it now. There are various techniques you can use to do that too. It's just a matter of they're going to expect it now.
Correct.
And telling people, okay, it'll be fine. Just give it another, we'll have to get in there. We'll have to rebuild your life for you, and it'll take 2 or 3 years. Just bear with us, right? Saying those kind of things, people are not going to tolerate listening to that. They're just not. And if you're sitting there in California, or if you're sitting in North Carolina, or the hills of Tennessee, or the top of the state where I grew up in South Carolina, that's right adjacent to Asheville, you're not going to want to hear that. And you're going to
No,
do something about it. Fortunately, in this country, you can do something about it. You can move somewhere else. And a
yes.
lot of people will, I believe. I think that's also the thing we'll have to see. And then lastly, and along with that, it's time's not going to be your friend. I mean, there's going to be such a huge economic dislocation because when you dislocate so many wealthy people out of one area, that area of Palisades and all those adjacent areas that where it started there, but it's all it's going north and south from there, and you dislocate
Malibu,
that,
Brentwood, yeah, all of them, yes.
and they are biased toward incredibly wealthy people. And as I mentioned to you, a very famous person who's very wealthy decided she's going to move to Rhode Island, and she just went and moved her whole uh, life to Rhode Island, to her mansion there, right? And she's not even thinking about California anymore.
Right.
That's a huge tax hit to state of California, much less any other kind of influence, especially when it occurs in massive numbers.
Yeah, you're talking about another aspect of openness, Tom, that people I think perceive that they have the freedoms to move, that they have the freedoms to retrain themselves, get into new industries. The workforce is very, very dynamic right now. You have the
Yes.
stale workforce, you have the dynamic workforce, you have the mobile workforce. By mobile, I mean they're moving to be where they want to be or where the situation is favorable and so forth. And this is all part of the themes that we've been talking about.
Absolutely. And the only thing we're trying to do is to get people to think about it.
Get people to think about it. And you know, Tom, I think we've just covered maybe 10% of what you and I have talked about the changes. So next video, we get into value exchange and then more on some of these other topics right after that.
It's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure, Tom.